steps in bird banding techniques, bird catching techniques, and ancillary techniques, including electronic techniques that have come in recent years that have enabled the development, the sophistication of bird banding studies of bird movements and all the other things that you can learn from marking individual birds. So I thought that was a second theme. And then the other thing is that Helen wanted me to emphasize that this is not just something I've done in the UK or in the last 33 years since I moved to live in Australia, but something I've been involved in every continent around the world in one way or another. And so something about the geographic distribution of the studies that I've been involved in. Now, unfortunately, I could talk for hours and hours and have a great tendency to do so. The great difficulty is how to compress all the million and one things that I've enjoyed in life, some of which I hope will be interesting to some of you, but how to compress that into a reasonable time. Well, let's have a go at doing that. How did I get started? Some people come into birding relatively late. They meet someone and that person influences, if that tells me the time, or that tells me how to move it.
Yes, that one will move.
So if I press that, I go to the next one. Okay, we'll press that one and make you all laugh.
This is crying out for a parody.
The one standing up. Oh, they're both standing up. Many people are influenced quite late in life. They meet someone who takes them out with them birding, they enjoy it, and they get hooked, and they start in their 40s, 50s, 60s. I was very fortunate to be right at the other end of the scale. I've been interested in birds ever since I was hatched. And at the age of, probably from the age of about 2, I literally, living on the edge of the countryside in Cheshire in northwest England, I was able to go out the front door, disappear off into the woods and the fields, and just do whatever I liked. It was safe to do that. I'm talking about the late 1930s, and I used to go out, and one of the things I particularly used to be involved in is looking at birds, and in particular finding birds' nests. And I think I was stimulated in that by the fact that my father, as a small boy, as many small boys in England did in those days, had had a bird's egg collection. And when he was away in the Navy in the First World War, his parents had moved house and most of those eggs had been broken. So I set about rebuilding that bird's egg collection. Just one egg from a nest, not the professional collectors who take a whole clutch. And then I was doing all sorts of other things, but that gave me my real grounding of field knowledge and field craft, how to get close to birds, how to watch birds closely till they lead you to their nest. And that was a great interest, as I said, from as young as I can remember, and I was very fortunate also to have 2 grandfathers, one of whom loved taking me for walks in the countryside. Whenever I went to their house, he'd always show me the nests of the birds in the garden. He knew where all those were. And the other one was a pigeon fancier. So I suppose there was that lovely family history to do with birds that fostered my interest as a youngster. And then you'll all remember certain times in your life where critical things happen. Sometimes very small, insignificant things that have completely changed the whole of your subsequent life. And several of those have happened to me, and I'd like to mention 3 of them during the course of the talk this evening. I'd like to mention 2 of them now. With this background I've already described, living in a country area, I'd been at a day school, but at the age of 12, I was sent to a boarding school in another part of the country. And although it wasn't the reason I went there, it happened to have a very strong natural history society and a very strong tradition in birds in particular. And within a week of going there, at the end of, just before I was 13, I was taught how to ring birds, or to, as it was called then, how to catch and band birds. And I got hooked on that aspect of the study of birds at that age. And within 2 weeks, I was able to go off and catch and band birds on my own. And then they discovered that I had this knowledge of finding birds' nests. And when the following spring came round, I was able to find these nests and show other people these nests, and was taught how to fill in a nest record card. What was in the nest each time you visited. In that way you can work out the incubation period, the period that the young take to fledge. You can work out the success rate and the habitat that the birds nest in. And also you can band the baby chicks in the nest before they fledge. I'm talking about passerine birds mostly at this stage. And I happened to be in the same boarding house as the head of the Natural History Society, who was particularly helpful to me, and we teamed up and we did an awful lot of this, and he showed me how to do this filling out the nest record card. And then came the critical day. There's a small warbler that visits the UK in the summer called a black-capped warbler, and it builds an almost invisible nest in the middle of a dense pile of nettles or brambles, and very difficult to find. And I managed to find one while it was still building this nest. You could see right through it. There was hardly anything there. And I started filling out my nest record card each day, and then there was one egg. The next day there were 2, the next day there were 3, the next 4, the next 5, and the next day there were still 5. So I knew that the bird had completed its clutch. Now I did not have a black-cap's egg in my collection. Did I take an egg for my collection and ruin the nest record card and have one less chick to band in when they hatched and grew up, or did I leave it? And I left it. And I think that was where the schooling I had had, the education I'd already started to get from the other people, changed me from a small boy egg collector into a very young budding ornithologist studying birds. And so that was a very significant moment in my life. A few years later, 2 years later, at the age of about 16, I was invited to go and stay with one of my school friends on the coast of Northumberland. And he started to show me shorebirds. Now, they were the last group of birds that I ever came to know, just simply because I lived away from the coast, and most of them occur on the coast of Britain. And you didn't travel much in those days, particularly the war years. And so it was 16 before I really started to learn these. And I went up there for one holiday in April and learned the dunlin and the purple sandpiper and the turnstone and the ringed plover and the red shank and these sort of common shorebirds with him. And then surprisingly I was invited back again in August. I say surprisingly because on the first night I stayed with these friends I upset the jam on the table, and the second day it snowed in April, and that was rather unusual, but we rolled up some snowballs and climbed on the roof of the house and dropped a snowball that just fitted nicely down the chimney. But it started out as a white snowball, but by the time it hit the fireplace in the dining room it was a black snowball and burst all over everywhere. But I was invited back in August, and I'd been there a few days, and we were going from one place where we'd been looking at shorebirds to another place on our bicycles along the shore. And we came across this little wader running around very fast on the shore, very tame, but we couldn't identify it. And it let us get closer and closer, and eventually I dropped a coat over it and caught it, and we still couldn't identify it. And this friend said, well look, Dr. Eric Enion is just setting up a bird observatory about a mile along the coast at Monk's House Bird Observatory between Bamborough and Sea Houses on the northeast coast of England. He's an expert on waders. Go, take it, let's take it along to him and he'll identify it. And sure he did. He said it's a juvenile sandling. It probably left Greenland 2 nights ago. And here you are, welcome to the civilized world. Someone pedals up to you on a bicycle and drops a coat over you. But anyhow, he identified it to us. But that sandling and meeting Dr. Enion was, I think, the most critical thing that ever happened to me in my whole life, because he was the most marvelous person. He had a huge influence on my life. He started and fostered my interest in shorebirds, but particularly he was one of those people who always encouraged you, and he very quickly found out that we had terrific expertise in catching birds. We were the fourth, as a school, we were the 4th largest bird banding organisation in the British Isles in 1950, and we had particular expertise in using clapnets. And he'd been dying to catch waders, been trying the year and caught about half a dozen on the drop traps. And so within days we teamed together, we caught the first grey plover, the first ruff, the first dunlin, the first ring plovers ever banded in Britain, and that was the start of waders banding in Britain. And I went to that bird observatory almost every school holidays for the next 6 or 8 years. That started shorebird ringing in the UK. That started me on my lifelong maximum interest in shorebirds, although I've studied lots of other birds as well. And in addition to that, it is also Muck's House Bird Observatory where I met my wife, Pat, the wife of 52 years. So you can see that event